Okay. Morning, sir.
Morning, sir. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Prof. Good to have you on a live stream this morning.
Thank you. Are they your uncles behind you in the picture?
Not precisely, but they remind me of my uncles going to farm.
Yeah, yeah.
Coming back from the farm, see the beautiful sunset because usually they go in the morning and come back in the evening.
Very beautiful. Very beautiful.
All right. Good
Thank
to
you.
have the opportunity to talk to you again today.
Thank you, sir. Good to be with
Thank you
you.
for always making the time to share with us from your
Pleasure,
wealth of
sir.
knowledge. And I want to welcome everyone joining our live stream today from whichever part of the world you're joining us from, whichever part of Nigeria, whichever part of the continent you're joining us from. Welcome to the God Talk podcast live stream with Professor Kent Hodge of Christian Faith Ministries. If you've been following our discussions on the channel for a bit now, you realize that we like to engage prevailing social issues, sensitive and timely social issues. We engage them from the standpoint of what the scriptures say, what God says about these things, how God expects us to order our steps, to guide our lives, and to live in the face of all that is happening today. Our world today is, kind of like spiraling out of control. You have a lot of chaos, division, trouble in most parts of the world today. Economic hardships, breakdown in relationships, whether they are geopolitical relationships or even relationships within a nation. There's a lot going off around the world today. It has led to a state where a lot of people are very pessimistic about the future of humanity and what tomorrow holds, what the future holds for human civilization. We have a lot of doomsday scenarios. Prof has been discussing these things with us over in our previous podcast. People are quite negative about the destiny of mankind today. But in the face of all these things, we try to bring balance and perspective to these whole discussions. And the idea is that God has shown us a path, the path to restoration, the path to recovery, the path to building a better society is all outlined for us in the Word of God. The Word of God is truth. And if we are open to embrace these principles and to actually apply them, we can begin to repair, reconstruct, and restore society and human civilization. On our discussions this morning with Prof, we want to look at Jubilee, biblical Jubilee, Jubilee from the Torah in the Bible, that practice of Jubilee. We want to see how the lessons and the principles contained in the Jubilee can become the basis for, a model that encourages socio-economic recovery for the world today and global prosperity. And so this will be our discussion this morning. We're looking at biblical jubilee, a socio-economic model for global recovery and prosperity. So what are those lessons we can take from the jubilee as outlined in the Bible that can be applied in the world today to now set us back on the path towards global recovery, restoration, and the prosperity of humanity as a whole? These are the things I want to be taking up with Prof this morning. Prof, once again, welcome to our discussions, our podcast.
Thank you, sir. Good
So to
morning.
get us started, I'm going to ask you to give us an overview, a general overview of what the Jubilee entailed in the Torah. What was the Jubilee about?
The Jubilee is it's called the Sabbath of Sabbaths, so it's after every 50 years, and coming up to 49 years. So 49 divided by 7 is 7 Sabbaths. And so 7 sevens are 49. Then the next year is the Jubilee year, which is it's the pinnacle of Sabbath. It's Jubilee is the ultimate expression of Sabbath. And Sabbath means rest, and it says in the creation narrative in Genesis 1 and 2 that after the 6 days of creation, God entered into his rest on the seventh day. And it doesn't mean that he sat down and did nothing. Rest means it's a kind of government whereby God um, we enter into a relationship with one another that is restorative. Just like the creation itself was very good, so it was balanced, it was holistic, and it was full of shalom. Shalom meaning peace.
Yeah.
Peace was because of its balance. So after the fall of Adam and Eve, the creation gets out of balance because of greed and things like that, and economic oppression and so on. And so there has to be this restorative principle, this returning to balance or holism, returning to shalom, and that's what the Sabbath is about. The Sabbath represents the government of God, the rule of God in the world, and so His rule is one of restoration of the poor, and that's what the Sabbath principle is. It says, "You shall rest every seventh day. You shall rest your handmaid and your servant." You should. So, in other words, you shall give rest to those that are under your economic power, and that applies to corporations today and so on. Not having an oppressive hand upon your laborers in wages and sort of extracting all you can out of people and just seeing them as an economic unit and not as a human being. So the world today has gone far away from Sabbath. And so the Jubilee, that is the Sabbath of Sabbaths, is after, as I said, after 49 years, the 50th year. And this number 7 with regard to Sabbath is very important because 7 stands for the days of creation, the first creation week, in which everything was good. As I said before, everything is in balance, is holistic. So 7 is referring to a good creation, a restored creation, a restored people. And so 7 refers to treating people in the original creational theme of man made in the image of God, not treating man as a slave, but as creation shows man. So 7 is a very significant number, and it's related to Sabbath and to Jubilee because it's about restoring creation, restoring humanity, treating humanity in the image of God as he was in creation. And so, so Sabbath, the Jubilee talks about restoring land to its original owners. It talks about cancelling debt. All debt had to be cancelled on that year. And so it was a reset of the economy. Where those that had become trodden down and had lost everything were able to restart, were able to have a new chance. So that their debt was wiped out, and slaves were set free. So it was just about the restoration of humanity. Equalizing economic imbalances that had built up over the years, that had made some slaves and others masters. So it was to rebalance human life. It's an ancient principle, the Jubilee. It wasn't just in Hebrew culture. It was stronger in Hebrew culture, but it existed in other ancient cultures as well to a certain extent, as an economic reset. So these principles are to be applied today. We live in a different kind of society today. We don't all live in an agricultural kind of society like Israel did, where we own agricultural land, and we have slavery, so to speak, in the same ways that they did then. We still have slavery today, but it's hidden. It's more economic. Jubilee may look different today, but it still has to be applied to our cultures in some way, to our economies. The principle of reset, of restoration, of liberating people from hard times and caring for one another, and that's really what the Sabbath is. When I was a child, Sabbath was very strict in terms of the law of our land. Shops were not opened on Sabbath because you weren't allowed to cause your people, employees to to work on that day. He had to give them the day off so they could go to church and so on. So all shops were closed on the Sabbath, on Sunday, which was a Sunday in a Christian society. And so that changed gradually as I grew up, and where shops began to open, big department stores began to open. Eventually, you couldn't see any difference between Sunday and any other day. And they said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. Sabbath is not literal. You don't have to have a day of rest, and all that." But what happens in the end is you get a society that's completely aligned with commercial principles. It's all about commerce. It's all about goods. It's all about being consumers. So society now doesn't really honor the Sabbath day. It doesn't honor the things of God like it used to. It just honors consumerism, profit making. Business has become the church of the land, and so we've eradicated the Sabbath day to our hurt. It's damaged our cultures and societies a lot, and we've done it in agriculture too. We don't give our land rest. In the scriptures, it says to give your land rest every seventh year. Don't farm it every seventh year, so it can restore its biological balance. And we don't do that now. We beat it and flog it every year. And so what we do is we put in chemicals. Instead of allowing the land to rest, we restore the land artificially with artificial chemicals. And so we can still harvest the land every year without rest. Still, it's all about profit. And so and it's all about banks too. So the banks tell us that you can farm for 7 years. You don't have to rest any year at all, and we will loan you money for your GMO crops, your heavily artificially fertilized land, and the bank will forward you the funds for that. You will make a profit and pay the bank back. So this whole thing is bank driven, the eradication of the Sabbath. It's all about bank profits. The banks are the ones leading this eradication of Sabbath. They don't care about people at all. The banks are anti-Jubilee. And the problem is using artificial chemicals. It begins to kill the soil, and it also gets into the food source. So we have a higher grade of sickness in the West now, even here in Nigeria, than we've ever had before, in terms of metabolic health, in terms of diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure, cancers. These things are at high levels now. And one of the big reasons is because of this, these artificial chemicals we use in our farming have entered our. They say, well, no, these chemicals don't hurt you. Well, if they don't hurt you, why do the people spraying the chemicals have a spacesuit on? It looks like they're on the moon.
Nice question.
Yeah, so they do hurt you. This is, you see, Sabbath is about nature. It's about getting back to natural principles, how God made the creation and our ecosystems, our farming, and modern life has said, no, we know more than that, and so these things are destroying our health in big ways now. There's got to be change in this area. But just to finalize my introduction here, as I said, there's many ways we can apply principles of Sabbath, maybe not exactly as they are in the scriptures, because our societies are different today. But one of the things is banks. We will not have Sabbath in our nations today, and it's because we're ruled by banks. And these banks are private institutions. They are not run by the people. They're not run by the governments. And so no matter who we elect to government, they can never do what the people need, because they are not really the leaders. The banks are the ones that really lead our nations today. They lead our governments. And so they're not going to initiate Sabbath because that will decrease their profits. The aim of the banks is more debt, more interest payments, and higher taxes. and inflation on our goods, on what we buy. All these things increase their profits. As inflation goes up, banks are able to print more money and create more debt and make more interest. So the banks are eradicating Sabbath from our societies, and they will never initiate Sabbath because it's against their own personal interest. And so our societies have been taken over by banks. We've been taken over by Pharaoh, like in the Old Testament, you had Pharaoh. This is how he ran society, through debt. And debt was enslaving the people. It was debt that made them slaves. And so people today are basically slaves, and it's because of debt. And there has to be a jubilee in our societies today. And the only way that jubilee will happen is to eradicate the rule of private banks over our nation. And this means things like International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Reserve Bank of America, the central bank of all of our countries today, Western countries, African countries. The central bank is a private bank. They pretend to be government, like the Federal Reserve Central Bank in America. It's neither federal nor is it a reserve. That name is just put there to make people think that it's a government institution and it's a reserve of deposits. There's no reserve of deposits in the Federal Reserve. The bank there has no reserves. It just creates money out of nothing. And then so if you go to buy a loan, if you go to get a loan to buy a house at the bank, they don't take that money to loan you from their reserves, their deposit reserves. They create it on their computer just by pressing a button. That money's created out of nothing, and they put that money in your account just by computer entry, and then they charge you interest on it. So it's not even their money. They made the money out of nothing, and then they charge you interest on fake money. It's not even real money. And so they're making interest on money that really belongs to the society. It's not theirs. It belongs to the nation, all of us as a people. But they create out of nothing. They say it's their money, and that you have to pay them interest on it. So the whole thing is a fraud, and we have to break down these banks, and our governments have to take back banking from these private enterprises, private interests, and start bringing out financial policies that are in the interest of the nation and not in the interest of the banks. And we can talk about that if we like going forward or at some time. But it's very easy to do. Very easy to do. We can initiate a whole new economy within a year if we will take this first step of eradicating private central banking, taking sovereign control of our banking. Nigeria will be in control of its own banking rather than a global banking enterprise. And once we do that, we can initiate a whole new way of financing that brings in Jubilee and also brings in the rebuilding of our industry, our infrastructure, our resources as a sovereign nation that will reignite our economy. So Jubilee is about reigniting the economy, cancelling debt that private masters have over people, and reigniting an economy of growth, of wages and that supports people. And for us to have Jubilee today, private global banking has to be eradicated. Countries have to regain their sovereignty in banking and finances so that banking will be for production, infrastructure, and industry, and for the people of the nation, and not for the profit of foreign private bankers. This is paramount. This would be the most important issue. Jubilee would be the most important issue, and the way we would go about Jubilee is because these masters will not cancel the debts of the nations, they will hold the nations in debt slavery, then we must cancel those banks. They will not obey God. They have no interest in Sabbath. They're Satanist organizations. The people involved in them are pagans. They belong to secret cults, and they have no interest in God at all. That they believe they are the gods, and they will never bring in Sabbath and cancel debt. So they must be cancelled. We must have governments that will stand up to these private banks and this global occupation and regain national sovereignty of our economic policies, so we can help the people. There are 1 billion people in Africa that have been held in debt slavery, and the banks will never change that. They will never bring Jubilee. So we must do it.
All right, thank you very much, sir. I would want you to just, I'm still going to stretch that line of thought you just ended with there, because I want to ask about the socio-economic implications of the Jubilee and what lessons the world can take from that today. I know that I like what you were talking about, debt cancellation there, because it's a very heavy burden, especially on third world countries like Africa today. I know that our nation, Nigeria, is under a very heavy yoke of this global and international debt burden. So I want you to talk to us about some of the social economic implications of the Jubilee as it were then, and what lessons we can take from that today going forward as we strive to build a better humanity and a better world.
Well, there's a lot of things we can do to cancel Nigerian debt, and I think one of them would be to recover fraudulent funds from foreign bank accounts. Like a lot of our money, Nigerian money, is being held in accounts in Switzerland and in the UK, and it's someone that's paid 100,000 naira a month will go to Switzerland and deposit $20 million.
Wow.
And they don't ask, where did you get this from? And they say, well, it's been a good month, thank God. It's fraudulent money that's deposited in these foreign bank accounts, and it holds up their economy. I've been to Switzerland. It's like halfway to heaven. The economy there is so prosperous, and it's based mainly on foreign deposits in their bank that they earn the interest on, and that holds their economy afloat. They are prospering off it significantly. And so not only is the money held in accounts like that, but also in what they call offshore accounts. These are secret accounts in the Bahamas or somewhere like that. And so you can deposit money there anonymously without using your name and without saying where the money came from or what you're using it for. It's complete privacy and secrecy in banking. So billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of African money, Nigerian money, has gone into accounts like this. Well, that needs to be recovered. We have, if we recovered all the money that was stolen from Nigeria, we wouldn't have any debt. It would all be cancelled. And the second thing is that the government needs to nationalize banking to some extent. I don't mean all banks, but what I mean is banking policy. And so that the private interests, global private interests, are not running our economy anymore, because they're just about greed. So the government, and this has been done by Abraham Lincoln, it's been done by other presidents in America, and not only there, but other nations, where the government issues credit free, without high interest cost. They don't take it from the banks. So if Nigeria needs a loan, we don't have to go to the IMF. We don't have to go to the World Bank. The government of this country can say, okay, we're going to print the money here, just like the foreign banks just print money out of nothing. We're not going to take their fake currencies. We're going to print money here in Nigeria, and then we're going to issue that money as credit. Okay, so in other words, we'll have our own economic committee in Nigeria that will issue loans to corporations, private enterprise within the country, that are going to build industries and build Nigeria's resources, process our resources. So resources will not be shipped out and processed abroad, that we will make that extra profits here by processing, that value added to natural resources,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
by our own regional processing plants. And so the government then is creating its own money. It's not borrowing it, and then it's using that money. We have committees. This is how China grew. The government started issuing its own money. Then it had about 1 million committees around the nation that interviewed corporations that needed money for industrialization, for infrastructure growth, and assessed those applications, gave loans to those places to begin to build. And China developed hundreds of thousands of banks throughout, or I don't know how many thousands of banks throughout the nation in local regions, loaning to local interests, local communities for local development. And the thing is that when we just have large banks, the biggest banks, they're not going to lend locally because they don't make money from that. They're only going to lend to the high finance institutions where they make a profit. So you've got to have small banks, not just a few big banks like we have in Nigeria. First Bank, UBA. We just got a few big banks. They won't be interested in developing small businesses. And small businesses are the backbone of a society, of a nation.
Very true. Very
So
true.
you've got to have, the government has to launch or make sure this happens, the launching of many small banks within the nation that will be having local interests, developing local communities. So there's a lot of things the government can do by nationalizing our economic policy. Once we print money ourselves and lend it to industrial projects and infrastructure projects, those projects will make profit, and that money will be able to repay foreign debt if we have any. You cannot repay foreign debt without profits from industry, resource development, infrastructure development. So what the International Monetary Fund do today is they will lend us aid money, like for a new injection or to benefit Bill Gates in his latest crazy projects. So they will say all the Nigerians have to buy this. And the IMF will loan money to the Nigerian government in order to pay the World Health Organization or something like that. So that's aid debt. But the World Health Organization will never lend Nigeria money to develop industry. So we cannot pay back our debt. It's eternal debt. It's debt slavery. That's what the IMF is enforcing on this nation. It's the opposite of Jubilee. It's debt slavery. So the only way we can pay back debt is to industrialize our nation and our resource processing and our infrastructure. That has to be done at quick measure, fast measure. And once that is done and the nation earns income, we're able to create Jubilee by paying off. We no longer have debt slavery. We can pay off all of our national debts. Now, this is the complete basics of economics. This is fundamental. But private central banks will never allow a nation to do this. They strip down the industry in every nation that they control so that they can bring that nation into slavery. This is the facts of the matter. This is what's happening to the whole world today, not just to Africa. But in Britain, it's happening to the people there. They're becoming debt slaves all over the world today. President Trump has recognized this and he's doing something about it. That's why they're trying to kill him, because he's going to break the power of these private central banks, the Federal Reserve, and all the things that we're talking about. And economic growth, industrial growth is what frees us from debt. Okay, and that's what the International Monetary Fund doesn't want us to have, because they don't want us to be free from debt. But once our industrial community grows, we pay off our debt, then we can say, well, who's the IMF? we don't care about them, and they no longer control our lives. So gaining sovereignty over Nigeria, it necessitates dealing with the International Monetary Fund, private central banking, and developing sovereign economic policies controlled by the government of this country and by no one else. That is step number one in Jubilee, and it must happen. Until that happens, we don't have a chance.
Oh, thank you, sir. Often, in the Torah, as it regards how, the Jubilee was commemorated and all the other activities that were carried out about the same period of the Jubilee, the atonement, and all of this. We're going to get to the atonement at some point. One of the injunctions or constant instructions God kept giving to the Israelites was to often remind them to remember that they were once slaves in Egypt. And we had that repeated over and over and over through the Torah. God was often reminding them to remember that they were once slaves in Egypt, that they were once slaves in Egypt. And God often said this when he spoke to them with respect to their interactions and their relationship with the nations around them. He was quick to point out to them to remember that they were once slaves in Egypt. So I wanted to ask you, what implications did this instruction, God asking them to remember that they were once slaves in Egypt, what implications did it have for their social interactions, especially with the nations around them today and with people who were not particularly Israelites, let's say that, or people who were disadvantaged and who were needing help? And what can we take from that today?
Well, it just shows that we should be merciful to others the same way that God has been merciful to us. That God extends Jubilee to us, so we should extend that to one another.
Amen.
And we should not be harsh. Just like Jesus' parables of forgiveness, there was one man that was forgiven a huge amount by his master, and then went and found a small person that owed him a little bit and put him in prison. So even though it was only small compared to what he was forgiven, and so Christ said that we should forgive others as we have been forgiven, and that's not just talking about spiritual things or sin; it's talking about money. Debt. That that's why I don't loan money, because I don't like holding people in debt. If somebody needs something and I can help, I give it to them. If I can't, I don't. But if I can, I do. But to loan money is a problem, because when they can't pay it, you become wicked, and then Jubilee comes up and God is looking at you. It's better to give, if you can, I think.
I hear you, sir.
Yeah, and and we have children. We help them by giving them money up front, so they didn't need the banks as much. Rather than them waiting for us to die and then collecting what we have in a will, and praying that we don't live too long. We thought, well, we'll divest our wealth now and give it to them early. So that means they're not, owing all that interest to the banks. And, and if we would do this for one another more, then the banks would be out of business. If as communities we helped one another. If we supported each other on a community level, you get Christian communities in America, and can't remember what they're called now. They're quite private. A lot of them are farmers. They reject modernization, and when one of them builds a house, they don't go to the bank, but the whole community comes and builds the house for them.
Wow.
And so within a week they can build a house by hundreds of people helping them and working them. So you don't have the individualism. You have the community. Everyone supports each other, and therefore the banks don't have any control in their lives. People like the Mennonites and the Anabaptists and these sorts of ancient Christian communities that exist in America today, they very much reject the bank control of their lives. But in individualism, we don't do that. And so what the banks say to us is, you see that man down there, he's got a bigger house than yours. We can lend you money and you can catch up with him. So it works on the principle of covetousness and individualism. And the banks, they control us that way by controlling our passions. That's how banks get mastery over our lives. They control our passions and our covetousness. They make us promises. They say, we can give this, you can have all this now, instead of, waiting patiently and building your life on sovereignty. They say, why wait? You can have everything now. We'll loan it to you. And so once they're learned, then they will go to someone else and see, look at the fine house I'm living in. We can lend you money also, and you can catch up with Dr. Hodge and live in a house. And so once they start loaning everybody money, and it's money that they haven't got, they just created this money out of nothing, then you find that the value of houses goes up because everyone is having money to buy houses. So you get inflation in the housing market. And so that just means that the banks make more interest. They get, you have to pay them more because the loans become bigger to pay for the houses, inflation. So they get more interest on all the loans. And so the whole thing is to serve the interests of the banks. Now, the Mennonites and these ancient Christian communities in America that still live in their old ways, they totally reject that kind of system. And they say, well, we won't live as individualism, but we'll live as a community. And we can have our houses, we can have these things because we will help each other to get them without the bank. A lot of people don't like the way these ancient communities live, but they've got a lot of good aspects to what they do. They don't use fake chemicals in farming. They're very healthy. They don't use artificial fertilizers and all these modern things. They're in the last pandemic, so-called, that we had 4 years ago, they were fine. They were healthy. Most of these things are a scam and a fraud when it comes to these viruses and the banks and individualism and the way we live and the breaking down of Sabbath and the removal of Jubilee. The whole thing is a fraud, and our way of farming makes us sick. It makes us susceptible to diseases and pandemics, and everything's just stolen from us. We live on taxes. Why are taxes going up in all of our nations? Because the governments are paying the private banks interest every year. Abraham Lincoln got the government to print its own money. And then the banks came along and said, well, no, we'll print the money and loan it to you, and then the government will pay us interest. And so the Federal Reserve was started in 1913 in America as a private bank. And they got that passed through legislation in the US government by passing it 2 days before Christmas when no one was on seat. And then they started the tax office. The Internal Revenue, IRS, the Internal Revenue department, and they started taxes. So at the same year as the Federal Reserve was started, taxes were started, and taxation. Why? Because the government's no longer printing its own money freely. The bank said, we will do it for you, and loan it to the government, and then the government will pay us interest. Well, how is the government going to pay interest on these loans? Well, it's going to have to introduce taxation. And so once they have this system set up of the Federal Reserve Bank that can print money anyhow and tax people for it, for the interest, then they started going into wars because the Federal Reserve would pay for these wars with fake money. First World War, Second World War, all the wars. Now we have everlasting wars, constantly wars. And the wars are run by these munitions companies. It's called the military industrial complex. They make all the money, not on creating Sabbath or Jubilee, but on creating war. They make huge amount of money, which the Federal Reserve is paying for and then taxing the people for. America now has $37 trillion in debt. $37 trillion. That can never be paid back under the Federal Reserve System. And a lot of that has gone to war, and which the people are paying in their taxes. So the whole thing is a system of fraud. The Federal Reserve as a private institution must be closed down, and a whole new financial system must be ignited. And I believe President Trump is doing that. That he doesn't come out and announce it every day, because they'll shoot him in the morning and in the afternoon, and again at nighttime. But I believe that is on his agenda, because without that you can't save the country. The country is full of corruption and crime, and it stems from the Federal Reserve. Unless you stop the occupation of America by global banking systems, that country will never be healed. Unless it has Jubilee, it's never going to be fixed. All these crimes and dictatorship systems of government that are coming out in recent years, of control and censorship, and all of that, it all stems from the Federal Reserve. Centralized private banking, which holds everyone as slaves. They believe they can control the whole of humanity, and they do it firstly through their money and our taxes. And so this is impoverishing people everywhere. In Britain today, people can hardly pay their light bill. They live in a small box, and they call it a house. They're very much oppressed, and none of it's necessary. The government is lying to the people, because they get part of the profits from these private corporations. They're all in it together, and so we need a real change.
Thank you, sir. In that light, these discussions around God instructing the Israelites to remember that they were slaves in Egypt, and that had to inform the way they treated people who were outsiders or people who were disadvantaged. There was a constant instruction to be good to the stranger, to be good to the foreigner, to be kind to the orphan and to the widow, and all of these. It brings me to a subject that is hotly debated and contested around the world today, and it's the subject of immigration and immigrant crisis. Around the world today, it's become a very volatile issue, with different schools of thought being peddled around the subject. I want to ask you, in the light of our discussions around the Sabbath, the Jubilee, I want to ask, what do you suppose are, I'm going to ask you two questions now. What do you suppose are the reasons why we're having a lot of immigrant crisis around the world today? That's one. And secondly, what are those steps, what are the steps that could be taken, or things that could be done in the countries these migrants are running away from? What could be done in those places to reduce this tendency for people to run away from their countries? Is it possible? Are there things that could be done to ensure that people just stay where they are and have a good life where they are?
Yeah, this is coming to crisis level at the moment in Western nations like Britain and Europe. Britain is on the verge of crisis, social crisis now, and I don't want to use words like civil war and things like that, but many experts, including one professor of war from King's College London, one of the main universities there, is speaking openly about this now, that civil war is pretty well inevitable. And there's two reasons for it. One would be the immigration crisis, and the other one would be the constant line of the government in Britain, that the government is totally and utterly without trustworthiness. They don't serve the people at all. They serve themselves, and they serve the corporations, the top leading, not small businesses, but the big oligarchs, the rulers. So it's not a democracy. No matter who you vote into office, they're not going to be interested in the people who voted for them. They're going to serve their economic market, the banks really. And there's a lot of research on this. I think a lot of it people are not willing or able to hear. What sort of background causes of this are.
Yeah.
But it's the royal families of Europe, Britain, Holland, Northern Europe, all the royal families. They're really the ones that have been in league with the main oligarchs, like the Dutch East India Company, British East India Company, that have been controlling our economies and our global politics up till this day. You get things like the Cecil Rhodes Scholarship. Cecil Rhodes was a man that controlled resources in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and those countries down in that area, and really stole control over resources. His descendants, so to speak, philosophical descendants, political, economic descendants today still control African resources. Like all of these 5 million people, 6 million people being killed in Congo in recent years over resource exploitation and theft. It's all done by the same people. It's by the same economic system that Cecil Rhodes set up for resource extraction, and the same intelligence agencies, European and American intelligence agencies, are involved in it. Trump is trying to overthrow this now. He brought peace between Congo and Rwanda. And part of the agreement of that peace was to eradicate the terrorism in those regions that was used for resource exploitation. And so Trump's doing this all over the world today. Yesterday it was announced between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And they've been at war for years, and they're signing a peace agreement now. Peace a few weeks ago, peace between India and Pakistan that had gone into a war. Now, India was separated from Pakistan by the British deliberately to set up animosity, to set up, divide and conquer. And Britain has been ruling that area since they declared so-called false independence many years ago through this animosity that they established between Pakistan and India. Trump is said, no, we don't want that. We want unity, we want peace, and we don't want to divide and conquer now. We want peace so that we can develop business and resource development within the countries, not by extracting their resources abroad to process them, but processed within the countries. So Congo now has deals to process their own resources within the nation. So that's going to develop the industry of Congo significantly.
Yeah.
Trump is also involved. He's a businessman, so he has his cut, not for him personally, but for America. Yeah. And so he's developing pipelines, oil drilling, huge amounts of energy development, economic development all over the world. He's taken out the industrial military complex, the wars in all these nations. One of the recent ones was Thailand and Burma, I think it was, a few weeks ago. He brought peace between those nations. What he does is he says, look, we will be involved in your peace and we will develop the economies of both countries through resource development. And they sign the same day. They said, well, we've been waiting for someone to do this. We'll work together in this and it will develop prosperity of all our people. We've been waiting to be set free from the CIA and the MI6, the British intelligence, and develop divide and conquer strategies to govern the whole world. We've been waiting for deliverance from that old system, and it's coming now. So all this change is happening, and I can't remember your question now. Why I got onto this? What was your question about?
I basically asked why we have as much of a migrant crisis as we have around the world today. And what can be done in those home countries where those migrants are moving away from.
We're talking about migrants.
Yeah.
You can, as I said, nations in Europe and Britain are quite close to civil war now, and I can understand it. One, because of the migrant issue, and two, because of the total failure of governments. What I'm saying is they're not democratic. They're not following. democracy means that government policy comes up from the grassroots.
Mm.
It bubbles up from below, from the common man. That doesn't happen in any of these nations. Policy is enforced from above, from the world banks. And I was talking about the oligarchs, the world banks, the biggest financial interest around the world, and the royal families of Northern Europe. They are the ones that control the banks and globalist policies today through Cecil Rhodes, the Rhodes Scholarship. I talked about Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholarship because Cecil Rhodes developed these colonial resource extraction system from Africa, and that is still being followed today. And he set up a Cecil Rhodes Scholarship. So many of the leaders around the world have been trained by his curriculum. You know, you get leaders in America, leaders in Europe, leaders in Australia, leaders in many countries have gone through the Cecil Rhodes School to be trained for politics, for political leadership or business leadership at the highest echelons of the elite. And it's not just a Cecil Rhodes Scholarship, but there are many sister organizations, many of them today, which train the elite, and they're related to Cecil Rhodes Scholarship. They're all the same curriculum.
Yeah.
To perpetuate elite control of the nations and of governments. That is prevalent today. That's why we have what we have. And so just giving a bit of background here, but when you see that these governments are not democratic, but they're run by the elite, you can understand why the people in Britain are disaffected and on the verge of doing something to take their nation back. Because you know, all these immigrants coming in, and they're coming in by the millions. And what's happening is it's impoverishing the people of Britain. The government is immediately putting them in hotels, paying all their medical bills, giving them money, cash every week, giving them jobs that the local people can't get. You know, for favoring them. One of the things of the globalists is to break down social cohesion, to weaken the people. So there's a lot of strategies behind mass emigration. You know, to bring in a whole lot of different religious cultures, you know, other differences in culture into a nation, and to create social incohesion. You know, where people don't know each other and they're afraid of each other, and like the ants in a jar that we talked about last time we were speaking, to begin to fight each other. Social incohesion, the breakdown, that gives the elite rule over the nations, because the people aren't able to unite and to come together and to become a strong unit. And to have a voice. They're too busy with all of their chaos and their problems. Easy to be ruled. This is Bolshevism or Communist Revolution 101. This is how it works. You bring about social incohesion, chaos within the cultures and societies, and then you can bring in a dictatorship and a new form of government to bring order and to say we will restore everything through a new system of government. That's how it works. So all these things are deliberate. You get, you know, NATO going into Iraq to destroy the nation, and then you get people like George Soros following to start a human trafficking system to get people out of there into the West. It's all deliberately orchestrated. They work together. NATO, CIA, bringing down nations through military intervention, and then they start human trafficking. And they have all these institutions set up they call charities, non-government organizations, but all they are doing is breaking down our democracies, bringing chaos to our nations. It's all deliberate so they can take control over our governments all around the world in a Bolshevik, you know, communist style revolution. So this is clear. It's happening. It's factual. And so, you know, people in Britain can't get pensions anymore because the government has spent all its money, all their money. So they were told they could retire at 65. Now it's 75, you know, 70, then it's 70. You know, one person said, I did my calculations And he said, I worked out that I can happily retire at 85 and then survive for 3 minutes on my pension. That's worldwide today. That's the same in Nigeria.
Yeah, that's
It's
horrible. That's very horrible.
everywhere because they've used our pensions to speculate on the stock markets.
Wow.
They've invested pensions in speculative investments, which is wrong. That's against, it used to be against the law. The Glass-Steagall, I think it is, law in America that made it illegal to invest people's savings or pensions into speculative, assets like housing or stock market things like that, and because they, you can that those systems can collapse and that all the money can be lost and people's pensions will be lost. That's what's happened. So there's all this fraud going on, and people are losing their pensions, and people of Britain have said enough is enough. And I said this years ago when all these Syrian refugees were coming out to Britain and to Europe. I said, look, the problem here is that we're destroying those countries. NATO and Obama and Hillary Clinton sponsored ISIS and their people before them, the Islamic Brotherhood and Al Qaeda and terrorist organizations were sponsored by the CIA in order to bring about destabilization of nations and regime change. The West wanted to get rid of the ruler of Syria, who departed recently, allegedly. I'm not sure what's really going on there in recent months, but they wanted to get rid of that leader, and so they rose up terrorist groups to bring him down. And they made millions of refugees. It's just these people are really evil. And they did the same thing in Libya by bringing down Gaddafi, who was doing a good job in Libya. He was greening the desert. He was turning Sahara Desert into an agricultural center. No taxes, but instead benefits for the people. Liberia was a prosperous nation. Now it's a slave trade market. I mean, well done, NATO. Well done. It's literally a slave trade market. You turned a prosperous nation, a developing, prosperous nation, into a slave trade market. That was directly achieved by NATO. First, they sponsored terrorist groups for the region, and then they said, we have to destroy the terrorism, and they bombed Libya. They're completely wicked. And and I've been grieving over this for years and saying, as much as I can, stop this warfare on these nations. Stop this false information, about the badness of these countries and using it as an excuse to destroy them. Stop this IMF policy of International Monetary Fund of destroying Nigeria economically, regime change, all these things that come in, Congo, resource extraction, destroying governments, raising up terrorists in Africa in order to control resources to destabilize governments. Stop all this, because Nigerians don't want to leave their country. They love their country. Stop this extracting doctors from Nigeria. So you can, why do they want to make immigrants today? So they can get cheap wages in the UK, in Europe. If you've got an excess of immigrants coming in, then you can lower wages. It gives you control over the workforce. That's what there are lots of reasons for this. It's deliberate by the oligarchy and by the banks. They make a lot of money out of this, and it's destroying all countries. They're destroying the home nations the immigrants come from. They're destroying the nations that they're sending them to because they can't take such large numbers of people. Their economies can't handle it. And so it's destroying everything. And that's what they want. They want to destroy everything so they can take rulership over everything. So the way to overcome the immigration crisis is very simple. Do what we're talking about before about Jubilee, destroying private central banking control over countries, rebuilding the economies in these countries, stop interfering in governments in these nations, stop regime change, stop raising up terrorist groups to bring down governments, stop all of this evilness that the CIA has done. They did it through USAID, we've been finding out recently. USAID, calling itself a non-government or a philanthropic organization, but it's not. It's sponsoring, political ideologies in other nations to bribe and to cajole, into new policies, LGBT policies that destabilize cultures. Instability is what they're doing everywhere. Even some of these funds went to terrorist organizations. Funds that were sent to Ukraine in recent times has turned up in West Africa, sponsoring terrorism there. They're all Nazis, or they call themselves Islamists or Bolsheviks or communists, and they pretend to be on different sides, but they're all on the same. They're all working together for the CIA and for the global banks today. The global banks have always sponsored both sides of a war. They create wars. They sponsor both sides of a war, so they can increase their own interests through the chaos and take control. So that's I long for the day when Nigeria prospers and people can. If they want to immigrate, they can. If they don't have to. I mean, but they're not forced to by the destruction of their own nation. Which is what's happening today. We've destroyed Libya, we've destroyed Syria, we've destroyed Iraq. They want to destroy Iran now. These warmongers. I mean, please, go to bed and have a rest. Stop all of this craziness, wanting to destroy all the time, frothing at the mouth for the next war. They love it. And then they create hundreds of millions of immigrants, and then they start shouting, "We don't want immigrants." Well, if you don't want immigrants, stop calling for war.
Yeah.
It's simple. Most of these immigrants are innocent people looking for a good life for their family. But there are some among them that are radicals, that are extremists, and they're sponsored by these destabilization groups. You get them in a mosque in UK calling out for violence. Who's paying them? Who's behind that?
Yeah.
The Muslims we know don't do that. They're peaceful people. Because we don't have an infiltration of these globalist organizations in our immediate neighborhood. We live as neighbors.
Yeah.
And so, these people, we can live as neighbors in our countries. Once globalism and these interests that I'm talking about, once they are cut off and stop sponsoring revolution and division and warfare and hatred and chaos in our societies, they're the ones sponsoring this chaos. And like the ants in the jar, they get us to hate each other. Did you hear what that Muslim said at the mosque last Friday? And we start killing Muslim ants in our jar. Because somebody is shaking our jar. You have brown ants and black ants in the jar, and they live peacefully until someone comes and shakes the jar. The ants don't see them. And then the ants think it was the other ants. And so they start hating each other. Well, that's what's happening today. Someone is sponsoring this, radical elements in different sectors of our societies. And we start hating each other, which is just what they want. So we've got to look beyond. We've got to find out who's shaking the jar and deal with them.
I agree. Thank you, sir. I want to ask you before we close up the podcast today to do a comparison. We've been talking about the Jubilee in the Torah and lessons we can learn from the Jubilee to heal the world we live in today. Now, I want to look at biblical Jubilee versus modern day identity politics. When we, from what you've been sharing, when we get to understand Jubilee as expounded in the Torah, we see themes of forgiveness at the center of the Jubilee. We see themes of mercy and restoration. We look today at our modern day identity politics and we see, a lot of division, outrage, scapegoating, total opposites to what we see in the Jubilee. So I want you to comment in this regard and also just quickly highlight how we can take elements from all these elements of forgiveness and mercy we see in the Jubilee and heal the level of division, outrage, and scapegoating that identity politics has plunged us into in the world we live in today.
Well, these elite, they are the ones that make identity politics, and so they create it. And this goes back a long way. If you want to look at it, I'm talking about the Reformation, 500 years ago. And so you've got the reformers that translated the Bible into our local vernacular and printed the Bible en masse. And so a lot of information came to the people that they weren't getting before. That there was, like we're having today, there's information has. Hello? Sorry, we got cut. Narrative, information and narrative is being controlled by the experts or so-called experts today. But back in the Reformation times, we had a democratization of knowledge and information. And when I say democratization, I mean available to everyone, not democracy in terms of modern democracy, but I'm using the biblical sense of that term. The priesthood of all believers, for example. So it's not about the elite. It's not about the experts. It's not about, the Pope and about the priests that had special anointings. It's about the priesthood of all believers. Even today, sometimes in Pentecostalism, you get the expert anointed prophets, and, you need them. Otherwise,
they become gatekeepers.
Yeah. But what we teach here at CFM is that no, the Spirit of God lives in you. You need to hear from God. You need to walk with God. And so it's not a matter of babysitting people in the church. But it's a matter of equipping people to know who they are in Christ and to live free. And that's what the Reformation did. And so, but then there was a counter-Reformation through the Jesuits that was set up in order to restore central narrative. And the Protestant countries really took off economically because they democratized information, they democratized power, they decentralized power, spread it to all the people. And so all the people became educated, they began to use their gifts and talents, and they began to build their nations. And Protestant nations prospered remarkably well, where the Catholic nations didn't. And so, this is what all mankind made in the image of God is about. We're all using our gifts and talents. We're all free. We're all respected, and we're all involved. And that's really the birth of modern Protestant nations. This is how it was born in the Reformation. It doesn't come from Greek principles, Greek philosophy. They love to talk about the Greeks and all the rest, but the Greeks were just pagans. And so it comes from Jubilee and these issues that we're talking about from the scriptures and so on, for the priesthood of all believers. But the Jesuits began to try to re-centralize the narrative and information and control. And they infiltrated our universities back in those days. And they started with, as I said before, a new cosmology, And so where they said that the earth, always for thousands of years, the earth has been the center of the universe. But they said, no, the sun is the center of, and they have no proof for this. It was just a new model, a new speculation, a new theory. And they developed a mathematical model to support it. Even Albert Einstein says you cannot prove this. Maths can demonstrate the logic of your model, but it cannot prove that that's the actual reality. And so they developed a new scientific model, or a model of physics, cosmology, where the sun is at the center, not the earth. And so the earth is insignificant. The earth is on the outer parts of a huge universe or multiverse. The earth means nothing. So this is a major shift in biblical view, where in Genesis 1 and 2, the earth is at the center. And at least it's at the center theologically, at least it's at the center in God's heart. God made the earth first. He made the sun on the fourth day. And I don't see any way around that. You can no gymnastics in Genesis 1 can change this concept, and that the earth is at the center of God's heart, if not of cosmology itself. And so I reject modern cosmology mainly because A, there's no proof of it, and B, what it does in identity politics. It's relegating humanity into a sense of meaninglessness. You know, the earth means nothing. The earth is just a mere spot on the edge of a multiverse. You know, it's totally unimportant. It's totally a random thing. This is completely different to biblical narrative of the priesthood of all believers, of the significance of humanity made in God's image. Just totally overrides biblical human identity. So a new identity has been created for us by the Jesuits. And these early Jesuit scientists like Copernicus and Kepler and even Isaac Newton were cultists, you know, who followed sun worship of ancient Egypt. They were not Christians. They pretended to be to some extent, but their interest was in cultism, and we have proof of that historically. I'm not just going to blindly follow these concepts that they develop for us. Secondly, then you get Darwin after that. Darwin said that the earth is billions of years old. And so life on earth is just a random mistake. Human beings are just a random mistake that just happened through evolution over billions of years. And so, you know, the cosmology and Darwinism put together relegate human identity to being a random mistake and of no meaning. Now, this is bringing us back to the ancient creation mythology, where mankind are slaves. They're insignificant. They're nobody. They're the identity politics of ancient creation narratives. It was a political thing to relegate humanity to slavery so that the elite could rule over them. That's identity politics. And modern cosmology and Darwinism has done exactly the same thing to humanity. So I know it's cultic. I know it's satanic. And I don't know all the cosmological facts and truth. I don't the physics and all the rest of it. I don't know that, but I'm certainly not going to be told all this random stuff by other people who don't know. They don't know what they're talking about. It's all guesswork, but it always fits their model. So science in cosmology is a model. It's not practical science. It's not demonstrable. It's not like science is supposed to be experiments that you can repeat and observe. Modern cosmology is not like that. It's all an imagination that's held together through different theories, but none of it's testable. So that's where identity politics has taken a big swing. Humanity, you know, in the Reformation, we're all made in the image of God. We're all the priesthood of believers. You know, we're the apple of God's eye. We have significance. We have democracy in terms of we're all equal involvement in community. We all have economic power. We all have political power. You know, this all goes into politics or something like that. But this has been taken away through modern education, where humanity has been relegated to insignificance. So we lose our political power. We lose our involvement. We lose We're not allowed to have a say anymore because the experts will speak. We're all insignificant now. So there's been this has been a major counter-reformation, and that the globalists have done. When I say globalists, I mean the elite families of the Roman Empire come down through Venice. We've talked about this into the royal families, into the banks, and all the rest of it, into Catholicism at times, and even into other churches at times. Any institution can be open to this for personal profit or gain or something like that. So, and become part of this system. But then you get identity politics more into LGBT issues. Again, dehumanizing people. What is man? Well, we're made in the image of God, but identity politics says, no, you can be transgender man. You can be transsexual man.
Yeah.
Man is no longer a woman and a male getting married. A man is, bisexual. A man is homosexual. A man is a woman. You have transgender. So there's, we've made shipwreck of identity. We no longer have an identity in God, but the identity is given to us by all these modern theories, by so-called science and philosophy, and it's been, the major issue today. If I said that the major issue is the private central banks, also this is the major issue: controlling the identity narrative of humanity is a major. So they've done that in Africa. Africans are, not able to live at peace with each other. They fight each other. There's corruption. That's why they haven't progressed. That's the identity that the world and Cecil Rhodes and all these others have given to Africa. And many Africans believe it. Instead of looking for the one who's really shaking the jar,
Yes, sir.
they've taken a hold of this global identity politics on the continent. Which, why this identity politics is put in Africa? Because Africa has been designated as a resource center for globalism.
Wow.
And so they don't want Africans to develop their resources sovereignly and independently. That's why we have this identity assignment given to us as a continent. It's colonialism 101. And we're not to, we can overcome these things by saying, well, by being subservient to the identity the masters give us, or we can overcome them by being like the Essenes and trying to bring war against Rome, or like Barabbas, those that revolted and through violence and become political agitators. Political agitators are often bought out by the elite; that they become corrupted. Or the third way to overcome it is through the church, is through Christ's way. By rediscovering the priesthood of all believers, rediscovering that being made our creation in the image of God, and beginning to treat one another that way, and to begin and now to take back our education, and to take back our commentary on government policy and banking policy, economic policy, being a voice to the world. Why are we such a voice? Because we believe in justice. We don't believe in false identities that destroy lives. The false identities in sexuality and transgenderism, they destroy lives. The people that are castrated because they're told they're a woman at 7 years old. Children that grow up without fathers and mothers, and all these things, lives are destroyed through identity politics. Why? So the masters can create chaos in our society, put us against each other, arguing against each other all the time, heterosexuals, homosexuals arguing against each other all the time. So they can bring chaos in our societies. And if our families break down, if they are able to break down our family order through identity politics, then the government becomes the family. It's all about increasing government power. If the family unit no longer has cohesion and financial strength and economic strength and a voice, then it loses its political strength, and the elite government has a monopoly on political strength. The family is crucial to national success and proper democratic politics. And it's a power. So they're destroying the family to shift the power to centralize power. It's a counter-Reformation movement, destroying families. It's a Jesuit movement. It's a movement of the elite. The way to get power back is to destroy the family. And that's why you get all these woke ideologies and woke doctrines destroying the family.
Yeah.
And instead of us seeing who's doing this, who's shaking the jar, we start to fight each other on this identity politics.
Mm.
You know, those who identify as heterosexuals fighting those who identify as homosexuals, instead of helping them recover. So it's the same in racial. We have racial identity crisis. Instead of that, see how the globalists are controlling Africa. Stop fighting on the basis of color.
Yeah.
It's you know, when it's not that issue at all. It's about economic sovereignty, political sovereignty, national sovereignty. It's about bigger things than that. And these smaller fights just keep us ineffective. We need to join together
Amen.
to fight.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Been so blessed with this conversation with you today that I think that by the time we get back together on Monday, I'd like to, spread this conversation further, but under the umbrella of discussing national security. And we'll not be discussing national security just from the standpoint of military might or military, kind of preparation or strength. We want to look at security through an all-round spectrum. Also, we'll be looking at talking economic security, social security. You talked about how global banking is a bane on local economies today. We also want to take that up and stretch it further, because sometimes we have these conversations, and one of the things about these conversations we have with you and why it's such a blessing is that you're not just looking at constructive criticisms, but you're always preferring alternatives. We live in a world today where it's easy to criticize. People want to pull down and destroy, but often do not offer an alternative, a way forward. But when we talk with you, engage with you, and hear you talk, you're not only constructively critiquing the structures we have today, pointing out their weaknesses or area of deficiencies, you are also offering proficient and effective alternatives, things that we can embrace in order to redress our steps and get better as a nation, get better as a people, and get better globally. So I think I would want us to, push this further when we engage on our next podcast on Monday. We want to actually look at the issue of national security. Okay, when God dealt with his people in the Bible, in an age where nations are clamoring for a lot of, security is a major discussion today. What did God say about how to achieve this? We're not just talking about security in terms of military might or warfare, but, economic security, social security, policies, and all these things around the nation as it pertains to Nigeria and other nations around the world, Africa and the world at large. These are the things that we'll seek to get to and pick the mind of Professor Kent Hodge when we meet during our next live stream. So please, if it's something you want to hear, make sure that you're here on Monday and get the word out. Get your people sensitized, like Prof continues to say to us. We need to be awake to these issues as the people of God. Our faith and our spirituality should not be an escape route or a hiding place where we bury our head under the sand like the ostrich, the proverbial ostrich, and act as if all is well around us. I keep reminding us on this podcast that we are called to be salt and to be light, called to be involved in social issues, economic issues, political issues, bring to bear. In the Lord's Prayer, we pray all the time, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God wants to see his will done on the earth. And we are the people of God. It is the duty of the church of God to enforce the will of God, not through violence or through, uprisings or revolutions, but modeling that example, the example of scripture, modeling that example to the world, beginning with our local communities, our churches, and showing the world that there is a better way, building community, caring, sharing, loving, giving hope in times of desperation. Thank you once again for being a part of our live stream today. And I want to say a big thank you to Prof for taking the time to talk to us today. Thank you very much, sir. You are an
It's a
immense
pleasure, sir.
blessing
Well done, sir.
to the
Thank you
body
very
of
much, too.
Christ. You are an immense
Thank you.
blessing to Nigeria. You are an immense blessing to the world, and we are
Thank you,
privileged
sir.
and honored to have you. Thank you very much. God
Thank you.
bless you.
Thank you.
God bless every one of you for joining our stream today. Please make it a date with us on Monday. Let's talk national security. God bless you. Have yourself a great day. Thank you again, Prof.
Thank you. Bye-bye, sir.
Yeah, bye, sir.